So JD, you're the CEO of Raygun, and you've got this great application performance monitoring system, and I'm sending you all this telemetry. My applications, it crashes, it sends information up to you, and then you send me these wonderful reports about how my application's doing. You have these great dashboards, but what if I want to see the raw data? I mean, I send it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'm a fellow nerd. I don't like my data really going anywhere. I like to have full control of it. And that's the philosophy that we've instilled at Raygun as well, which is it's your data. We don't do anything with it other than report it back to you. But one of the areas that we've also been expanding into recently is opening up our APIs, meaning you can actually pull back all of the raw data that you have sent to Raygun. So if you wanted to give it to a BI team, hoard it under the bed, whatever you want to do, you have that and own that data. You can control it however you want.
Fantastic. Your data, your way, modern tools for teams. Raygun gives you X-ray vision into your code. You can sign up for a free trial at raygun.com. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I'm chatting with Veni Kunche. She is the founder and CEO of Diversified Tech. She's got a master's degree in computer science. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I love looking at people's LinkedIns, especially when they have such interesting stuff that they've been doing over the years. I find it so interesting. A lot of folks just have one or two things on their LinkedIn. You have all kinds of fun stuff in the process of getting your master's. It looked like you worked for the government for a time. No disrespect to our wonderful friends who do the government, but it doesn't sound like the most dynamic environment. Was it fun or was it not fun to do government work?
You know, it was, I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey. It was my first job out of college. At the beginning, it was fun because I got to, use the knowledge that I learned in classes. I put it to real applications. It was great at the beginning. However, after a year or so, it felt boring because I didn't have coworkers that I could chat with. I was the only technical person on the team. So after a year or so, I need to learn more. I don't know if what I'm doing is right. I don't know if I'm following the best practices. At that time, I was like, I want to do something more. That's when I got a master's in computer science and data science. I wanted to actually go into bioinformatics, work more in healthcare at that time.
Interesting. So that's surprising. You were the only technical person. Somehow I had the perception that it would be like a massive team. I guess things like the, USGS and other small government agencies, it's not that there's hundreds of people working on a thing. They're little pockets of work.
Yes. My little pocket was called Wisconsin Informatics Group. And when we first started, it was just my boss and I, and he would kind of find technical needs from different orgs of the USGS. So one of our projects was from the EPA. So he was kind of like the first in that department to kind of like, hey, I think technology can help us. We're doing all of this stuff in like Excel databases or like paper. I think technology will help us. So he would kind of like find us in different pockets of the USGS and he would bring those projects. And I was, at that time, web development was also new to me. So I was one of the first ones helping the group at that time. And this was back in like 2004, 2005.
Yeah. And it's funny that you used the term that made me smile there. You said Excel databases, because in my experience doing work with the government, there's always a quote unquote database,
yes,
which is Excel, and really, really old versions of Excel. Remember, they only had 65,000 rows.
Yep.
And you end up losing data when you go over that. Now that's not a problem anymore, but the database is filled. Oh, you mean the Excel sheet that we put all our crap in?
Yep.
Interesting. So you got tired of that and you did different work. You wanted to work in informatics. You did some work in informatics. You were a biomedical research fellow for a time as well.
Yes. So at that time, the word data science didn't really exist, but that's what I studied. Unfortunately, I had trouble finding a job within that field. So I did an internship at the NIH, which honestly wasn't really data science. I was again doing the same thing as the USGS, helping people take data from Excel and building web applications. So that's what I did at the NIH for a brief period. Unfortunately, at that time, data science wasn't popular. And everybody kept saying, you need a PhD in this. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely not getting a PhD after all of this studying. So I went back to software engineering after that.
Yeah. It's funny how you need a title, like that title data scientist kind of was the last 5 or 6 years became a thing.
Yes.
And it's like data wrangler
Yeah.
or, random data person that we don't talk to in the back office. I remember working with those people, but now you're a data scientist. When you got a cool name, now you can get a job much quicker than that. So getting a job is important. And certainly the way that people get jobs right now is, websites like Stack Overflow, or they go to user groups and stuff like that. How did you get these jobs? How did you find these jobs, back in the early 2000s?
Honestly, I had a rough time because I lived in Wisconsin. So not many, not many companies hiring for tech folks. And also at that, I was a minority, and in Wisconsin, you really stick out when you're a minority. After I graduated, it was in 2003, I got my CS degree. Unfortunately, I had a really rough time finding my first job. I think I applied to like hundreds of companies, and eventually I got an internship at this credit union company where I learned, I think at that time it was like, I forgot what it was before C Sharp, but it was like in the .NET world. And I was doing some work there. And then eventually I was like doing contract work for nonprofits to learn web development. And then eventually through a referral, I got a job at the USGS. And all of that took like 2 years to get like a full-time stable job. So even back then it was like hard because I had no network. I lived in Wisconsin, but I didn't know many tech folks. And also as, one of the first ones as a woman in my family to go to college, I didn't know that I was supposed to do an internship in college. I didn't know I was supposed to network while in college, and I was supposed to get myself ready to look for a job. I did all of that the last semester, and that was kind of like too late. At that time, when I was looking for a job during my last semester of college, I realized, oh wow, I was supposed to do a lot of other things like networking, making connections, going to career fairs. But honestly, as like an immigrant and like new to the environment, I just didn't know a lot of things. So I had a rough time finding my first job. But after the first job, it was a little easier, to navigate the tech world, make connections and things like that.
It seems like that concept of networking comes intuitive to some people, some cultures, and I mean also West Coast versus East Coast,
Mm-hmm.
North America, South America, like cultures very broadly. Some cultures really like, yeah, the network. Your cousin knows a guy who knows a person. Da, da, da. I grew up with a father who was like everyone knew him in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So networking was just watching my dad be charming and talk to
Mm-hmm.
people. But when folks come here, they're like, I'm going to come here and do hard science and get a master's degree,
Yeah.
and there'll be a job waiting.
Yes.
It's not intuitive, would you
Mm-hmm.
say, for some folks to network?
Yes. So yeah, look, my dad's actually also in tech. So he was the first one who in our family to go to college, and he navigated finding a job in different countries, but he was also like taught you get a degree and you'll find a job. So he pretty much told me and my brother, like, you focus on your studies, we'll take care of the rest. And that's what our assumption was. You study hard, get good grades, it'll work out towards the end. But unfortunately, that's not how the real world works, and especially not here.
Do you think that's something that should be taught? Like, I have a 17-year-old who's now looking at colleges, and he's thinking 5 years out, like, when I start looking for a job, I'm already thinking about, like, what does it mean for me as someone who's been in tech for now 30 years? You've been in tech for 20 years. We know people.
Mm-hmm.
So we can call somebody and we can go and we can, to use Anwan Simmons' phrase, lend our privilege,
Mm-hmm.
because we have this context list,
Mm-hmm.
right? How important is it for a young person to start building their network like immediately?
Yes, I think it's very important. Like, if I was to go back and do my CS degree again, I would definitely go to career fairs every year and make connections from there. Start looking for internships year one. I think I would definitely start building my network like right away. Once I decided that that was my major.
Yeah. Career fairs, I just remember the whole, like, they bring all the people into the gym and they have set up little
Mm-hmm.
tables and you get to go and walk from place to place to place. And you said that your first job was an internship. My first job was an internship as well. I'm a big fan of paid internships. I mean, I made minimum wage, but it was still paid. And it made, and I felt like I had a little mini job.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised there aren't more internships. It seems like a paid internship is a great way to get
Mm-hmm.
started in tech.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. You basically quit the corporate environment and decided to do a startup, and you have a website, diversifytech.com. I'll put a link in the show notes that connects folks in tech with career opportunities, primarily underrepresented folks. Is this like a virtual ongoing job fair? Is this, what is the site? Is it a match.com for programmers?
Yeah, I guess you could say that like a virtual career fair. So, based on my experience, how I've had such a hard time finding a job. And also, there were many other things I didn't know about. Like, I didn't know about scholarships, that there are specific scholarships for minorities, that, all of that I just didn't know. So, I started it as a newsletter to just kind of share information that I wish somebody told me when I was starting. So it started out with like scholarships to conferences, scholarships to, any college related scholarships. That's how it initially started. Then eventually I was like, okay, jobs. Like at that time when I started 5 years ago, there was a lot of push to get people to learn tech. Everybody can learn to code. This is how you can do it. And corporations started funding a lot of that kind of stuff was to learn. But I noticed that people were learning, but after that, there wasn't much support, how to find a job, how to actually connect with companies. Then I was like, okay, we need companies who care about diversity, who truly care about diversity, who are not just saying that they care. So I started reaching out to companies who are genuine and want to help diversify their workforce. And it's like, honestly, like a lot of folks reach out and I was like, oh, I had no idea that there were scholarships for minorities, there are a lot of folks like me who just like, because if you don't have that network, like how would you know, right? So that's why I want to be like that person who shares those resources for people.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like the phrase I mentioned before that Anwan Simmons said, in lending privilege, because if you know a bunch of people and you can connect a bunch of people together, then why not do it, right? But if no one knows you exist, no one knows your company exists or your website, like we're talking about today. So I try to do the best I can whenever I can to like say, oh, you should talk to Veni. They know what, that those kind of little connections, and they don't cost anything. Back in the day, back in the 90s, I got my first job on a bus. I was sitting on a bus and I had made, because this is how we did things in the 90s, little business cards. Because we went to Kinko's. I don't know if you remember doing this. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to make a little business card. I don't have a job. I don't have a company, but I have a little personal card, right? So you'd give people your cards. And then the way that you kind of created luck was you'd be bumping into someone at the shopping mart or on the bus. And you go, oh, I know the president of something, something. And then you'd hopefully they would give you your card and they'd go, this young person's got moxie. They have a card, and then they would call you and you'd get a job. We can make those connections, can't we, online today?
Yes, it's like so much easier now, and you can connect much more, many more people than we did face to face before. Yeah.
So your site has both a large newsletter, you have a student newsletter, and then the website itself is a complete job board.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that you thought it was important for companies that are genuine about having diverse workforces. It feels like companies have a lot of, I don't know if nepotism isn't the word, but folks hire folks that they know.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you know people? You know them from other jobs and you know them from where you went to school. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, that's one of the reasons I had such a hard time finding a job, because my own little network wasn't connected to the people who could give me a job. And that's true for a lot of minorities because, we are sometimes the first in our family to get a college or go to college, or first in our family to go into tech. So all of a sudden, you just don't know a lot of information that, some people seem to already know.
Yeah, that point about knowing stuff that people already know. Like I was the first in my family to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, because of that, I went to community college
Mm-hmm.
and then I went to a state school years later. I'm not doing a very good job of helping my son make college decisions, right? Like someone was like, you should go on a college tour. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, you go and visit colleges. I'm like, who has visiting colleges money? Like I never,
Yeah.
I'm going to take time off work and like go visit colleges, but that's a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would I have ever known that was like a thing? It's a whole world I'm learning about college coaches and all that kind of stuff. The same thing applies in finding jobs in tech. And if you don't know, then you're not connected. How can you get connected?
Yeah, and they do say like recruiters, hiring managers, their network usually tend to be people who look like them, right? So if they're sharing a job, they're probably sharing it with their network who looks like them. Then, for folks like minorities, like there needs to be some sort of connection between those groups. So that's why I feel like, it was important to create something where I can connect, recruiters whose networks may not be as diverse.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Someone might be listening to what we're saying and they might be dismissive. They might be like, I don't know what are these two talking about. It's really not about the color. It's not about the background. It's just about the tech. I can see where they're coming from. And I would, even if I may ask an uncomfortable question and you tell me what you think,
Mm-hmm.
you are South Asian in your background. Some people might say South Asian people in tech in some industries are well represented.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see that in the diversity of tech space fitting into your journey and other people's journeys?
Yeah, so I think, it depends on the location, I think. So, for example, for Silicon Valley, I'm sure, there are a lot of South Asians, like there are CEOs who are South Asian, there are a lot of people. But I lived in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin. I was one of five minorities in my high school. And it was like, big high school. It was like 500 kids. And when I went to college, at the beginning for the intro classes, there were a lot of, women, there were a lot of minorities. But as I, went through the program through the last, semester, I used to be the only one, you know. So things like that, it totally depends on your location. I believe, like for South Asians, like I met a few. Like I worked in tech for 15 years. I have never worked with an Indian woman. Like I worked mainly in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And I've never worked with an Indian woman. I met with one Indian man, and that was because I had a contract position. I was a consultant and my project was in Houston. In Houston, where I met people who were, had colleagues who were of diverse backgrounds. But like, other than that, yeah. So it totally depends on, I feel like, the location, the industry, like the government. Again, if you work in the government, there are very few minorities in tech.
That's a really great point. I think that folks sometimes, even myself, I'm in Portland and I think about things in the context of the West Coast. And if my existence isn't a Midwest existence, I'm not going to think about things like what Wisconsin, Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
the Great Lakes area feels like and what that must feel like. I have friends who are of minority groups in places like Iowa, and they have very, very different, interesting experiences than someone even in like Austin or now in DC, which is certainly a much more diverse place. I've always felt like tech should look like the mall. So if you go to the mall and walk around, you're like, okay, this is what the people look like. I would then hope my team looked like the folks that I saw at the mall, wherever that mall happens to be. I don't know. That's my test.
Yeah, and another thing to add about South Asians is that the stereotype for South Asians is also that people see us as worker bees. So, like, scenes, programmers, things like that. Usually, we do not get as much a chance in leadership positions. So, like, I'll give an example from my dad. My dad has worked in tech, like, almost 40 to 45 years. And he has so much experience, but only in his last stage, just recently got into a leadership position because people saw his expertise, but they always were like, oh, you don't look like a leader. That stereotype is there for Asians. So that's another, layer. Different demographics face like different biases and stereotypes.
Yeah. That you don't look like a leader is such a weird and complicated sentence. I was talking to my son who told me that something like 90% of American presidents are over 6 feet tall. Now, separate from the fact that they've all been white guys except for Obama, you've got this idea like, why are we hiring tall people? And it's because they present in this like big way. And when they stand on their box and, oh, I look at the tall person. So we attribute height and leadership to being these two things. So, I've had lots of really great folks on the show, lots of South Asians, including South Asian CEOs that were petite and having to work through that, like being, I don't look like a leader is just coded into our brains from watching TV and movies and seeing our own leaders. That's got to be a hard thing to push through. So yeah, trying to figure that kind of stuff out and understand where it fits in for me, as someone who's trying to be an ally, trying to be a helper in the space is challenging. I think the best thing that I can do is to help with my network and spread the word about jobs because I see companies saying, I'd love to hire people. And then they just put a newsletter out and go, hey, everybody, there's a job.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're upset that like a lot of people didn't apply. But it seems like they're not really using all of the resources that are available to them to get the word out.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I used to often see on Twitter saying, hey, like no women applied to your job. And you ask the question like, where did you post your job? And they basically most likely they just had it on their career page and didn't really share beyond their, little network.
Right. So then the question is then where do people hang out? And then I think then that's the goal. You need to post your jobs at dozens and dozens of boards,
Mm-hmm.
places like Diversified Tech. But I've also used examples like NISB, the National Society of Black Engineers.
Mm-hmm.
There are women's user groups. Where do the people that you want to hire
Mm-hmm.
hang out?
Yes.
So then you want to get the word out so that folks can do that. Now, if someone was going to go to Diversified Tech right now and post a job or join up, who pays and who doesn't? Like what costs and what doesn't?
So right now, anybody who wants to post a job, there is a cost to it because every company that comes to us, we have like a vetting process because people say they care about diversity, or they might be using it as more like a branding thing, like associate themselves with like some a diversity organization and hope that that helps. So what we do is every company that comes in, we look at their employee reviews, like how are they treating their current employees, are they talking about racial discrimination or gender discrimination, or are they like working them very long hours, things like that. We look through all the employee reviews, and then sometimes like something feels iffy, then I go to like the women in tech Slack groups and ask people, hey, has anybody worked at this company, what do you think? And you'd be surprised at how much a company portrays themselves as online, but behind the scenes there's like a lot of off things going on. So we have a vetting process. So after that, we say, okay, if everything looks good, then we continue the partnership. So because of that, because we put in that effort, so there's a charge for companies to post our jobs because we want to make sure that they are allocating money to diversity causes and make sure that they're very committed and not just throwing something out there and say, okay, check mark, I did the thing. I care about diversity. So
And then folks that want jobs, they don't have to pay anything. They can just join your newsletter right off the bat. So they can go right there and click join newsletter, and they can sign up for both the pro edition or the early in career or student edition. One other thing that I think is cool that you do that I had not seen before is it's not just a job site.
mhm.
It's also a talent directory. How did
Yes.
you have that idea? You don't see a talent directory a lot in these spaces.
The reason I did that is because for companies who have a budget, I wanted them to have a job board. But for companies who may be too small and may not have the money, I wanted to give them, still access to folks who are looking for jobs. And honestly, the main reason is that a lot of companies say there's a pipeline problem. There are actually there aren't many minorities or women and LGBTQ youths who are qualified. I wanted to show some, no, you're wrong. Here they are. I built that to show here are so many people qualified who are looking for jobs. You're just not looking in the right place. Here they are. That's kind of like a point I wanted to make.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like, I don't think people really understand scope. And
Mm-hmm.
when you think about how many a million is, it's
Mm-hmm.
like 1,000,000. Like, there's 8 billion people on the planet. There are tens of millions of devs.
Mm-hmm.
They can speak at your conferences. They can come on your podcast. They can go and work at your company. It's very likely that you just can't see folks. It might be that they're overseas or they're in Wisconsin doing their master's degree or whatever, right? And they just want to know where you are. When I was coming up, we didn't have any of this stuff. So we went to user groups, which I think are a great way to be seen if you can
Mm-hmm.
get childcare, if you can get out of the house, if you can make your way to where you're going, being seen is a great way to do that. I know that you're seen on social media. How important do you think it is for someone who is in tech to be seen, to go on GitHub and have a profile picture that's the same as their Twitter? Is that important?
Yes, it depends on their bandwidth, but I think it is important to be, it's part of, I think, networking in this age, to be on social media, to share what they're working on. And if you are looking for a job, just let your network know that you are looking for a job. Because I've seen so many connections being made on like Twitter. People say, hey, I'm looking on Twitter. I'm looking for a job, and people share. People, tag people who might be looking. So it's like one of the easiest ways to network. I feel like to just share.
And I like that you said just share because That doesn't mean go and become a full-time content creator. That doesn't mean have a YouTube. Like you pointed out, not everyone has the bandwidth for that. But simply being present, showing up. And I've honestly have found people for jobs who have simply asked really good questions.
Yeah.
I think that we focus too much on, do they have a LinkedIn and a Threads and a Twitter and a like, that's a lot of work. I don't want to have 3 jobs.
Yeah.
But I see that they're out there, building side projects or doing cool stuff. And then they asked a good question and I go, hey, there's that person again. So where do you see this going in the future? Like you've got the site up, it looks solid. You've been doing this startup now for a while. When do you stop calling it a startup and call it like when does it become a giant corporation?
I guess it's somewhere in between. Not exactly a startup, but a giant corporation. But I prefer small teams, so I hope I plan to stay small and small, but have as much impact as I can.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, like I have 2 kids, so like work-life balance, all of that is important to me. For diversified tech, especially now with the environment, there's lots going on, like a lot of backlash to diversity. I still, I want to make sure to continue and tell people, there are people who still care and we're here for you.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot going on right now and everyone is tired of a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's not an excuse to like not keep the pressure on. I know sometimes the term diversity gets pushed back and I always push gently back on that with the concept of inclusion, right? Are you excluding people? Are you actively trying to exclude people? Like there's enough work for everybody. There's a lot of great work happening out there. Let's try to cast a wide net and include everybody.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Well, I'm so glad that you are out there fighting the good fight and that you and the folks at Diversified Tech are making that happen. I really appreciate you chatting with me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
We have been talking with Veni Kunche. You can check her out at diversifiedtech.com. We'll have links in the show notes. And this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.